I had just scooped a spoonful of the stew I'd made, about to take my first bite, when Aiden's voice stopped me. "Don't eat that," he said, his voice calm but filled with a kind of fear I had never heard from him before. I froze, the spoon hovering just inches from my mouth. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he just looked at me, his eyes wide, filled with pure terror. It was like nothing I had ever seen. My stomach twisted. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I lowered the spoon and stared at him. "Aiden, what's going on?" I asked, trying to sound calm, but inside I was already starting to panic. His fear was real, and it was catching. He didn't speak for a moment, just looked at the food, then back at me. "It's not what you think," he whispered. His words sent a chill through me. My heart raced as I set the spoon down and tried to make sense of what he was saying. This was just dinner. Why was he so scared? I needed to know what he meant. I had to. So without another word, I grabbed my coat and took him straight to the police. "My name is Maya. I'm a single mom, just trying to do my best for Aiden. We have a quiet life in a small apartment, in a neighborhood that's mostly calm, except for the occasional noise from kids playing outside. Things had been rough lately. Work was stressful, and I had a lot on my plate. But still, I always tried to make sure Aiden felt safe and loved. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that's all I ever needed. Aiden is 10. He's smart, kind, and just starting to come into his own. He's always been more mature than other kids his age. He's a good boy, and I trust him more than anything. There's this quiet strength in him, and that night, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before: fear. The evening started out like any other. We'd had a pretty normal day. Aiden came home from school, and we made dinner together. It was nothing fancy, just a simple stew, the kind I knew Aiden loved. But as we sat down at the small kitchen table to eat, something felt off. Aiden wasn't himself. He was quiet, staring at his bowl more than eating, his little fingers nervously tapping the edge of his cup. I tried to push it aside. Kids have off days, right? But when he spoke, his voice carried that worry I couldn't ignore. "Don't eat that," he said again, his eyes full of something I hadn't seen before, something dangerous. "Why?" I asked, now more concerned. I don't know," he stammered, still staring at the food. "Just don't eat it, Mom, please." I didn't know what to think. Was he playing around? Being dramatic? No, this was different. This was real fear. And when he didn't say anything else, when he just kept looking at me like that, I started to wonder if there was something more going on than I could see. My mind started racing. What was wrong with the stew? Had I missed something? It looked fine. The ingredients were simple, nothing new or strange. But then Aiden's face came into focus, and I saw it. He wasn't acting like this for no reason. Something was scaring him. I needed to know what it was. "Okay, we need to go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, I was already thinking the worst. Aiden's fear was real, and it felt like it was spreading to me. "We're going to the police." He didn't protest, just nodded, his hand still trembling as he pushed his food away. We left the house without another word, the night air cool against our skin. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I couldn't ignore his terror. Whatever was happening, I needed answers. And fast. As we drove toward the police station, the air inside the car felt thick with tension. Aiden sat beside me, his hands tightly clasped together in his lap. He hadn't said a word since I told him we were going to the police. His eyes were fixed out the window, his face pale. It was almost as if the reality of what he had said, the fear that had been in his voice, was starting to hit him too. I glanced at him a few times, my heart aching. I didn't know how to comfort him, didn't know what to say. What could I say? He was terrified, and I could feel it in every inch of his body. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by this palpable fear that I couldn't quite understand. I knew my son well enough to know when something was wrong, and this wasn't the kind of thing he'd ever joke about. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he had seen or sensed, it wasn't something small. It wasn't just a child's overactive imagination. It was something serious, something that had made him react in a way I hadn't seen before. His usually bright, curious eyes were dimmed now, clouded with worry. I wanted to reach out and touch his arm to tell him everything would be fine, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. How could I promise him that when I didn't even know what was going on? I tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept racing. What could possibly be wrong with the food? I had made it the same way I always did. Nothing unusual, no strange ingredients. It was just a basic stew. So why had Aiden been so terrified when I was about to eat it? Why had he insisted that I stop, his voice trembling with fear? And then it hit me. He hadn't just been scared for me. He had been scared for himself, too. The way he looked at the food, the way he hesitated before saying anything. It was as if he had already known something was wrong, something that I couldn't see. His warning wasn't just a protective instinct. It was a desperate plea. He didn't want me to eat that food, not because it was simply unappetizing, or because he was trying to be dramatic. He was scared of it. The thought made my stomach turn. Was it possible that someone had poisoned us? Had someone slipped something into the food? My hands tightened on the steering wheel as the thought spiraled through my mind. I tried to push the idea away. No, that couldn't be it. But what other explanation was there for Aiden's reaction? And why had he been so sure, so certain that I shouldn't eat it? Mom? Aiden's voice broke the silence, soft and hesitant. Do you think I was right to be scared? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I don't know, baby, I replied, my voice shaky, but we're doing the right thing. We'll figure it out. It's better to be safe than sorry. Aiden nodded, but his gaze remained fixed ahead, his lips pressed together tightly. I could see the questions in his eyes, but he didn't ask them. He was trying to hold it together to stay calm, but I could feel the weight of his fear in the car, almost suffocating. The police station came into view, and I slowed down, the bright lights casting long shadows on the pavement. As I pulled into the parking lot, I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. What would I say to them? What could I even tell them? Aiden's warning seemed impossible to explain, but I knew I had to try. I couldn't let this slide. If there was something wrong with the food, if someone had tampered with it, we had to get to the bottom of it. We parked, and I turned off the engine, but neither of us moved. I glanced over at Aiden. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He was still frightened, and now I was too. Come on, sweetheart, I said softly, reaching out to squeeze his hand. We'll be okay. Aiden didn't answer, but he took my hand in his grip tight. We stepped out of the car, and I led him toward the entrance of the station, my mind still spinning. I didn't know what was waiting for us, but I knew one thing for sure. This was no longer just about dinner. Something far more serious was going on, and we were about to face it head on. As we walked into the police station, the reality of the situation started to settle in. The usual hum of the station, the noise of officers typing at desks, the soft murmur of phone calls, the occasional phone ringing, felt muffled in my ears. My mind was spinning, and I couldn't help but feel like a stranger in this place. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Aiden and I were just supposed to have a simple dinner, something to unwind after a long day. Instead, here we were, in a place that felt so unfamiliar, with no idea what was waiting for us. Aiden's small hand tightened around mine as we approached the desk. His eyes darted nervously around the room, avoiding eye contact with the officers who were now glancing our way. I could feel his fear radiating from him like a tangible force, and it made my stomach churn. I squeezed his hand tighter, trying to reassure him, but I was just as unsure as he was about what we were doing here. Was I overreacting? Had I taken this too far? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. Aiden's warning had been too serious for me to ignore. If he had been wrong, if this was just some misunderstanding, I'd look ridiculous. But if he was right, and something was indeed wrong, if someone had tried to harm us, I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. "Can I help you?" The voice of the officer at the desk cut through my thoughts. He was looking at us with a mixture of curiosity and professionalism, his hands folded on the desk in front of him. He seemed used to people coming in with questions, complaints, or problems, but something in my gut told me that this was different. There was an urgency in my chest, a sense of responsibility for Aiden that I couldn't ignore. I looked at the officer, then at Aiden. His face was pale, his shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. He wasn't the usual confident boy I knew. He was still terrified, holding himself together only by a thin thread. "I need to speak with someone about a possible emergency," I said, my voice steady but urgent. "My son thinks something was wrong with the food we ate at home." The officer's eyes shifted, a faint look of confusion crossing his face. "What do you mean, ma'am? You think the food was contaminated?" I nodded, trying to keep my composure. "My son, he told me not to eat it. He was terrified. He said it wasn't what I thought it was." I paused, glancing at Aiden again. He had his head down, not looking at anyone, his fingers still tightly clasped together. I don't know what to think, but he's scared, and I trust him. We need help. The officer studied us for a moment, his eyes flicking between Aiden and me. He must have seen something in my face, something in the way I was clutching Aiden's hand, because after a long pause, he nodded and reached for his phone. "I'll get someone to talk to you," he said calmly. "Stay right here." I sat down in the waiting area, the silence stretching between us. Aiden still hadn't said a word. He was staring at the floor, his body stiff as though he were bracing himself for something. I wasn't sure if he was waiting for confirmation that his fears were real, or if he was hoping that this would all turn out to be nothing. But he was holding his breath, and so was I. The minutes seemed to drag on, each one heavier than the last. I kept glancing at Aiden, trying to read his expression, trying to find some sign that everything was okay. But there was nothing. His face was a mixture of fear and confusion, his mind clearly racing. Finally, a detective walked into the room. She was tall, with sharp eyes and an expression that was both calm and commanding. She introduced herself as Detective Collins, her voice calm but authoritative. "Ms. Rodriguez?" she asked, looking directly at me. "Yes," I answered, standing up, Aiden still clinging to my side. "We've had reports of food tampering in the area. I need to know exactly what happened. Your son said there was something wrong with the food. Could you tell me more about what he noticed?" I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. I didn't know how to explain it. It sounded so ridiculous, so out of the blue, but it was real. Aiden had been so sure. I looked at Aiden, who was now staring up at the detective. His eyes were wide, still filled with that same fear. He was barely holding it together. "Aiden, tell the detective what you saw," I said softly, my voice encouraging but steady. He looked up at her, his lips trembling, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw something in the food," he said, his voice shaky, a tiny piece of glass. I didn't want to say anything, but it scared me. I thought Mom would eat it, and she'd get hurt. The detective's face didn't change, but there was a shift in the room. She nodded slowly, clearly taking in his words with seriousness. "We'll need to inspect the food," she said. "It's good you brought this to our attention. We're going to get to the bottom of this." Aiden and I looked at each other for a moment, and in that instant, something clicked. This wasn't just about food. It was about trust. It was about knowing that we'd made the right choice, that Aiden's instincts had saved us from something far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. The detective led us to another room to start the investigation. As I looked down at Aiden, his hand still in mine, I realized that we were about to find out just how serious this really was. And, as much as I wanted everything to be okay, I had to face the possibility that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than I had ever anticipated. The tension in the small room where we waited felt unbearable. Aiden sat next to me, his legs bouncing nervously, his eyes darting around the sterile room. He still hadn't spoken much, except for his quiet explanation to the detective. His hands were tightly folded in his lap, and every now and then he'd glance up at me, his face filled with that same mixture of fear and hope. I couldn't stand seeing him like this, but I knew that the only way to move forward was to trust the process. I kept my mind focused, but it wasn't easy. There were so many questions swirling in my head. What had Aiden seen in the food? Was it really something dangerous? Or had his imagination gotten the best of him? Still, as much as I tried to push those doubts away, the gnawing feeling in my gut wouldn't leave. I needed answers. The door to the room opened with a soft creak, and Detective Collins stepped inside, holding a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was the food. What was left of it anyway? The stew that had seemed so harmless earlier now looked ominous, sitting in the bag, as if it held some dark secret. I sat up straighter, suddenly feeling a rush of anxiety. What is it? What did you find? My voice was barely audible, above a whisper, but it carried all the weight of my fears. Aiden, sensing the shift in the room, looked up, his eyes wide with worry. Detective Collins placed the bag on the table in front of us. "I'm afraid your son wasn't mistaken," she said, her voice calm but serious. "We found a small piece of glass embedded in the food, just as he described." My heart dropped into my stomach. I could feel the room close in around me as the reality of what we were dealing with began to sink in. Aiden had been right. Someone had tampered with the food. It wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't just an accident. The thought of what could have happened, what might have happened if Aiden hadn't noticed, made my chest tighten with dread. "Who would do something like this?" I asked, my voice trembling. It wasn't a question I expected an immediate answer to, but I needed to hear something, anything, that would help me make sense of this. Detective Collins took a deep breath, then looked at me with an expression that told me she wasn't about to sugarcoat anything. "We don't know yet, but we're going to find out. Right now, we have a lead, and we're going to pursue it. I can't give you all the details yet, but this isn't the first case of food tampering in the area. We've been investigating several reports like this over the past few weeks." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just some random act. This was part of something bigger, something more organized. My mind raced with possibilities, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized just how serious this could be. Someone was targeting people, using food as a weapon, and we had been their latest victims. The detective continued. The glass was carefully placed, not just accidentally dropped in. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't some careless mistake. It was intentional. Aiden's grip on my hand tightened. I could feel his fear as if it were my own. He was trembling slightly, but I could also see a glimmer of relief in his eyes. The confirmation that he hadn't imagined the danger, that he had been right to warn me, seemed to ease some of the weight on his shoulders. "We're going to take it from here," Detective Collins said, giving me a reassuring nod. "I know this is a lot to take in, but we're doing everything we can to track down whoever is responsible for this." As she left the room, I sat there, processing everything. My mind was still reeling, but there was something else bubbling beneath the fear. Gratitude. Aiden had saved us. His sharp intuition, his fear, had led us here, to the police station, to a place where the truth was beginning to come to light. He had noticed something that I never would have, and in doing so, he had spared us from something terrible. I looked at him, my heart swelling with pride. "You were right, Aiden. You were right to be scared. You saved us." He met my gaze, and for the first time since we'd walked into the station, I saw a small smile on his face, the fear in his eyes replaced by a quiet confidence. I knew something wasn't right. "I'm glad I said something." "Me too," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "I am so proud of you. We sat in silence for a moment, just the two of us, the weight of everything slowly beginning to lift. But I knew that this wasn't the end. It wasn't over. The person responsible for this was still out there, and the danger hadn't disappeared. But for the first time in hours, I felt like we had some control, like we weren't just powerless in the face of whatever this was. I squeezed Aiden's hand. "We'll get through this. Together," I said, more to reassure myself than him. And I knew that, no matter what came next, we would face it the same way we always did, together, with strength, trust, and love. As we left the police station, the weight of the day began to settle in, and I could feel the tension finally start to loosen, if only slightly. Aiden's small hand was still clasped tightly in mine, but now, it wasn't out of fear. It was out of something deeper, something that had shifted between us in those few intense hours. It wasn't just the relief of knowing we were safe. It was the quiet bond that had grown even stronger because we had faced something dangerous together. I looked down at him as we walked through the doors of the station, feeling a rush of pride swell in my chest. Aiden had been scared. He had known something was wrong, even when I hadn't. His gut had led him to protect me, and he had done it without hesitation. As a mother, there's always this quiet, underlying fear that you aren't doing enough, that you might not be protecting your child as well as you should. But that night, in the midst of all the confusion and fear, I had learned something important. Sometimes, your child has the strength to protect you, too. And in Aiden's quiet courage, I saw a side of him that I hadn't fully appreciated before. We got into the car, and I started the engine, but neither of us said much. The city lights flickered by, their glow seeming distant and insignificant compared to what we had just been through. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective, like we were both taking a breath after a storm. I glanced over at Aiden, his face still pale, but there was a soft, quiet confidence in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Are you okay?" I asked him, my voice soft, just above a whisper. He nodded, but his gaze remained out the window, lost in thought. I could tell he was processing everything, just as I was. What had started as a normal evening had turned into something that neither of us would ever forget. The questions, the fear, the unknown, it had all felt overwhelming, but somehow we had made it through, together. "I'm fine, Mom," he said quietly. I'm glad I didn't eat it." His voice had that quiet pride in it again, the kind that made me feel like he had grown up just a little bit more in those few hours than he had in the past year. "Me too," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. I swallowed hard, blinking away the tears that threatened to well up. "You saved us, Aiden. You saved me." He looked over at me then, his expression softening as he met my eyes. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." I smiled at him, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. That moment, those words, reminded me of everything I had worked so hard to provide for Aiden. Love, safety, trust. And now, more than ever, I realized that those things weren't just about the sacrifices I made or the things I did for him. They were about the bond we had created together, a bond that would protect us through the hardest of times. We pulled into the parking lot of our apartment complex, and as I parked the car, a sense of peace started to settle over me. The fear of the unknown still lingered in the back of my mind, but it wasn't as overwhelming as it had been before. We were safe. We had done the right thing by going to the police, and soon, the person who had done this would be caught. There was still so much to figure out, but at least now, we had answers. I helped Aiden out of the car, and we walked up the steps to our apartment, side by side. He seemed lighter now, more at ease. I could tell the fear had started to lift from his shoulders. The strength he had shown, the bravery he had possessed, was something I would never forget. And as I unlocked the door to our apartment, and we stepped inside, I knew that I had learned a lesson too. Sometimes, trust isn't just about what we know. It's about listening to that quiet voice inside us, the one that tells us when something's wrong, when it's time to act. And sometimes that voice comes from the people we least expect. The next morning, as the sun poured through the kitchen window, Aiden and I sat down for breakfast. The food was simple, pancakes, just the way he liked them, and there was a lightness in the air that hadn't been there before. I watched him carefully, my heart full of gratitude for the child who had seen what I couldn't and saved us both in the process. "I'm really proud of you, Aiden," I said softly, pushing a plate of pancakes toward him. He looked up at me, a shy smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm just glad you're okay, Mom." In that moment, I realized that we had already faced something huge together, and no matter what else life threw our way, I knew that we would always have each other. No fear, no danger could take that away from us. That was our greatest protection, the love and trust we had built between us. And that, I knew, was the most important thing of all.